Welcome back. You are watching, quite literally, thousands of Russians put their lives at risk to protest the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. These are anti-war protesters in Moscow and St. Petersburg, across Russia. And few things make Vladimir Putin more angry than people protesting against him. 1,900 arrests. But it does show that the Russian people are not necessarily all in on this, and there is certainly a lot of anger at Vladimir Putin over his foreign adventures and the cost to Russia, especially economically, in the terms of foreign sanctions. In the words of my next guest, the use of foreign aggression to rally support for the regime is not new in Russia. Many believe Mr. Putin want to recreate the Soviet Union. Much more likely, they want to recreate the Crimea effect of bringing back the popularity that Vladimir Putin had when he invaded Crimea in 2014. David Satter, noted author, Russian expert, the last book, Never Speak to Strangers, Other Writing from Russia and the Soviet Union. Are these protests a sign of something more, or just a little bit of an anti-Putin group?
Well, I think the protests are a significant beginning. The numbers are not that great. And for the moment, the country supports the aggression against Ukraine. But things can change. We've got the example of the first Chechen war. That was launched by Boris Yeltsin, and his aides said that we need a short, victorious war to boost the president's rating. Apparently, it didn't occur to anyone that that's not a good reason to start a war. In any case, at first it worked. But then, as they encountered the fierce Chechen resistance, and the number of people being killed mounted, and the number of amputees in the metros and begging on the streets began to multiply, enthusiasm for the war began to disappear. And finally, 18 months after the war began, Russian public opinion was demanding that an immediate end to the war under any conditions.
You think about it, Vladimir Putin
likely to see a repeat of that scenario now.
Well, Vladimir Putin certainly doesn't want this to last 18 months. He doesn't want it to last 18 days, although it might if the Ukrainians continue to extract a little bit of a price. The flip side of this would be what happened in Syria when 300 Russian mercenaries were killed by the U.S. military when they tried to attack a U.S. military base. And Vladimir Putin covered it up, wouldn't talk about it, and that sort of ended some of the Russian adventures in Syria because Russians in body bags is not popular, the same way it's not popular in the United States. Is Putin powerful enough, and is this the speech he gave and this idea that he is avenging the fall of the Soviet Union and protecting Russia from Western aggression enough to overcome at least the initial casualties we're going to see?
Oh, it may overcome the initial casualties, but the real question is what happens when the guerrilla warfare begins. They can occupy territory. They command this. They control the airspace, and they have numerical superiority. So they can occupy large parts of Ukraine, but can they hold it? Ukraine's is bigger than, geographically it's bigger than France. It's 40 million people. They couldn't hold Chechnya, which had 1 million people and was the size of Connecticut. So I think that this is just the beginning of what we're going to see. They will not be able to peacefully occupy Ukraine and install a puppet government. Yeah, and the support that they're counting on is going to slowly dissipate.
Well, you conceivably think they're going to get some support in the eastern part of Ukraine, right, where it's more ethnically Russian. When I was in the Donbass in 2014, there was certainly a part there that was supportive, and in Crimea you have some support. He's been there for a while. Vladimir Putin is the grand chess master. How is he miscalculating this, or what's his exit strategy that we're perhaps not seeing?
Well, I wouldn't give him too much credit. I mean, you say he's the grand chess master, but what he really is a criminal who
that too.
Basically has no respect for the lives of his own people, and is together with a kind of a small group, monopolizes power and property in the country, and is ready to use war as an instrument of consolidating his hold on power. And the reason that works is because of the injured nationalism in a country where people just are nostalgic for the days of the Soviet Union in many respects, at least for the days when Russia was feared.
Yeah, you said something extraordinarily important. People in Russia, especially the older generation, want the great days of the Soviet Union back, when Russia is feared rather than sort of this second-tier or third-tier economy. John McCain called it a gas station masquerading as a country. You've studied Vladimir Putin. This is a big thought. The United States isn't stopping Vladimir Putin in Ukraine. This is a man who, in many ways, is very similar to Hitler in his rhetoric and his justifications. Is there any reason to not take him at his word that if Vladimir Putin left unchecked, as much of a criminal as he is, that he will continue these adventures into Poland, into Estonia, Latvia, some of the other countries of the Baltics that became part of NATO?
Well, the risk is much greater when it comes to attacking a NATO country, but the fate of Ukraine is really going to have an important effect on the fate of Europe. We have every reason to support the insurgency that's going to develop in Ukraine, because and not only that, we have every reason to impose crushing sanctions on the economy, because those are the factors that are going to turn the Russian people against Putin and against this adventure. We also have the opportunity, if we're capable of using it, of speaking the truth to the Russian people about Putin's long record of crimes, beginning with the way he came to power.
Yeah, so far the Biden administration just doesn't seem to have the appetite for that. The piece in the Wall Street Journal where we found you, "Weakness at Home Drives Putin to Invade Ukraine." David Satter, the great writer, joined us from Paris. Merci, thank you. We appreciate the time, sir. It was good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Thanks for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.